Hello and welcome back to Crushing Comics, the show where I fall in love with my comic book collection all over again. Let's see what we're going to fall in love with today. Whoa! Oh my gosh, this one's really heavy. Let's see. Part of what's really fun for me about this series is that it's all from memory. I literally have only ever pre-looked up notes ahead of maybe opening one thing where I was like, I don't know about that. Otherwise, and I'll let you know when I get to those notes. I haven't had to yet. So all of this has been from memory, and I am the kind of person that even in my original comic collecting days, back in the 90s, where I had like a perfect memory of like what character was in what first issue and what cover was of what issue. I was like a little database brain when it came to that thing. That sort of stuff. And when it came to a lot of other stuff, albums and what track numbers certain songs were on certain albums and like who wrote certain songs. And I don't say that because I think I have a perfect memory. I certainly don't. But I think that it's the nature of how we remember things. Like, I'm somebody who makes a really strong use of mnemonic devices where, like, I don't know, like in phone numbers, the reason I can remember phone numbers is because I look at the patterns of the numbers and I try to make guitar chords out of them. And even if they don't make guitar chords, like I know relatively what direction they are from the guitar chords, and that's how I know the numbers. And thinking back to my whole life, like I use a lot of little tricks like that to remember things, and so when I'm spouting off all of this stuff, I just picture this like vast retrieval system in my head where I'm, buzzing around and being like, oh, this cross references is a D chord, but it's backwards and at the 7th fret, and oh yeah, that's the first issue that Rogue appeared in, or something like that. And it just makes me really wonder how people even create those systems of memory, because I know I would be lost without all of those references. It's not good enough for me to just be like, yep, I've got it, I remember it. And clearly not everybody's remembering things in terms of guitar chords and comic book issues. And so it's just interesting because there's something about the nature of your nurture that helps you to determine how to remember things. So I just think that's a fascinating process. Let's see what we've got here. Oh. Okay. Was that a sinister enough laugh for you? I have here what is known as probably the best Avengers story from before Brian Bendis took over, and also what is known as possibly the worst Avengers story, not only from before Bendis took over, but recently in a group of comic fans that I frequent online was touted as possibly the worst omnibus that Marvel had ever released. Before we get to those two, there's this one oversized hardcover. It's Avengers Origin by Joe Casey and Phil Noto. You've heard me be a little bit down on these Origin books, like, why do they exist? Nobody ever goes back and references these insert stories, blah, blah, blah. Here's the thing. Joe Casey, not a particular favorite author of mine. He really swung and missed a lot at Marvel, and there's a reason he's not writing for them anymore, although he's really good in a lot of other things. And he was good in the X-Men in the late 90s, early 2000s. But here's the reason to want this in oversized, and I can tell you it's the reason I picked up. It is because the artwork is by Phil Noto. Phil Noto is one of the best working artists in comics. There's something to him. He draws these very painterly panels. He does fantastic faces. He choreographs terrific action. And, he draws, I think, the best women's faces in all of comic books. And he's been in a lot of fantastic series at Marvel, specifically the Marvel Now Black Widow series and the Heroic Age X-23 series. He's now been illustrating Star Wars for a while, which seems to be one of his live streams. So for me to pick this up, it was about having an oversized version of Phil Noto art and really no other reason than that. Let's start with the bad and then move on to the good. So this is Avengers The Crossing. It was one of those times where people saw it solicited and said, what the did Marvel pick this omnibus for? Nobody knew. The Crossing was the big Avengers storyline that just barely preceded their participation in Onslaught and subsequently their removal from the Marvel circulation. And what Avengers consisted of at this point was not just the main Avengers book, but also Force Works, which was the outgrowth of Avengers West Coast that was in a way similar to X-Force as an outgrowth of New Mutants, in that it was meant to be a slightly more extreme, cool, modern, and proactive version of what we were used to seeing in the Avengers. And this was the first time that they had been really gathered significantly with the Avengers. Usually they just interacted with Iron Man since he was a member of that team. But the circumstances of this crossovers I mean, look, even on the back of the book, it says one of the 90s most notorious narratives. They knew how much people don't like it, even as they printed it. And it was released in 2012, so I guess that makes it aligned with the Avengers first movie. Marvel seriously pins their omnibuses to movies. The data shows it to be true. It is not speculation. And you have to think like, oh my goodness, wasn't there a better Avengers story that they could have put out in concert with that first movie? Who saw that movie and then read this book and said, wow, that's the Avengers that I love? So I don't even really know how to explain it other than it involves a teenage Tony Stark and that it's most hated. Honestly, I haven't read it yet. I've read parts of it because I do like Force Works. And I picked it up because it was super on sale and I knew that I was going to regret it if I didn't get it so that I couldn't experience how bad it is. So I can't even corroborate how bad it is. And I love 90s comic books. Who knows? Maybe I'm going to read this and think that it's great. The other thing, though, is that I don't really like when omnibuses get orphaned, and this is in a really weird spot. It collects Avengers 390 to 395, so there's not enough Avengers after this to be totally collected, and the Onslaught omnibus doesn't start until a few issues, I believe, after this, so there's a little gap there that's not probably going to fit well into an omnibus. And what Avengers omnibus is going to collect up to 389, like the end of the leather jacket era? It would be a weird run to go into that. So I tend to really frown upon books not only because the narratives are notorious, but because they're notorious for picking up runs that like don't connect to anything really. And the other thing is this leaves 15 issues of Force Works. That I could see getting into an oversized book, especially as it contains that Hands of the Mandarin crossover with Iron Man, and so there's a few more issues to pad it out. Here is, however, what in many views is one of the best Avengers stories of all time, and is a rare oversized hardcover of a pre-2000 Marvel series. Marvel very, very rarely does them, and the few times that they do, it's almost always the X-Men in these like pseudo-omnibuses. So this is a very, very rare version of collection, and it is the Avengers Kree-Skrull War. It goes from issues 89 to 97. So here's something you need to know about this run. People hear Kree-Skrull War, right, and we've been tipped off that we're going to start seeing the Skrulls at some point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We've also seen the Kree mostly via the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show, less so in the movies, although that could change with Miss/Captain Marvel's movie since her origins are Kree-derived. So people see the name of the storyline, they see that it is 9 issues long, and they think, oh my gosh, this must be like the Dark Phoenix saga of the Avengers. It's not really. The only way I can explain it is that there's a thread running throughout it of the Avengers stumbling upon this major conflict between the Kree and the Skrulls, but it's not one of these like go to space blowout kind of stories. It resolves a long-running plot thread of some Skrulls that had been left on Earth, and at the same time it also connects to the Kree partially by using, what is his, I want to say Rick Jones, who at the time, I guess, had the negabands that could allow him to change into Captain Marvel, but at the same time, he was like an Avengers-y sidekick. Gosh, old Avengers fans, please don't hate me. I have read this, but it has been a while. And so the upshot of that is that it's just not like an 8-issue long, blow-em-up space saga opera plot. It's not. It's a series of individual issues that are really, really fascinating that all add up to a war that largely has been playing off-screen and as a backdrop to what the Avengers are doing on Earth. So it's very, very different from the Phoenix Saga, and even though it constitutes the most famous run of stories probably in the Avengers history, it's not a single story. However, the other thing it has to its credit, which I do think is a big part of its reputation, the artwork is utterly phenomenal. It is Sal Buscema, Neil Adams, and John Buscema, and it has perhaps my favorite page of Marvel, which is crazy for me to say because usually it would be X-Men if I say favorite anything. But just look at this Neil Adams Vision page. It's just phenomenal. And you can see the saddle stitching in this page too, so nice wide gutter, it opens all the way out. And this whole issue, it's called Journey to the Center of an Android. Ant-Man, which I guess is still Hank Pym at this point, has to go into Vision and fix up some things. It's just a stunning work of comic book art. I highly, highly recommend reading the one issue, even if you don't read all of the run. And that issue is issue 93. So I have read this. I haven't read any of the books leading up to it or coming after it, so it's certainly something you could read as a standalone. It's been collected in many, many different ways in many, many different volumes at this point. And I believe the Avengers Volume 3 Omnibus announced for this year might run right up to this, but not into this. I could be mistaken, though, and if I am, we'll have a flashing Chiron or something. So that is our little Avengers packet today. The Avengers Origin, and then one of the Avengers' most famous stories, and then another one of their most famous, or as Marvel called it, most notorious stories. So here is the official shelving of those 3 Avengers books. Gosh, I think we might be starting a new shelf today, kids. I'm going to go right down here and pick up, oh my goodness, this massive brick to do next time. So thank you very much for watching, and tune in again to see what's inside of this hefty brick of comic books here on Crushing Comics.
Who I am.